Welcome, everybody. My name is Bill Eisenberg, and I'd like to welcome each of you to the Bay Area Council's Healthcare Committee. We decided that because of the importance of vaccination for COVID-19, that we would broaden our regularly scheduled Healthcare Committee meeting to include all of you members of the Bay Area Council because of the timeliness of this topic and the importance to all of the rest of us as this new topic develops for us. Actually, moment by moment. In fact, today's news brought us even additional information that is very encouraging about it. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'd like to also say that my co-hosts for this morning are Tom Hannenberg, who is currently serving as the interim regional president of Northern California Kaiser, as well as Carrie Owen Pleats, who is the brand newly minted, today is her first day, president of the Northern California region of Kaiser Permanente. So welcome to both Tom and Carrie, who are the co-hosts for this morning's session. In addition, we have three panelists who are joining us. Randy Bergen, Dr. Randy Bergen, who is the immunization lead from Kaiser Permanente, the Northern California division. Dr. Bernard Lowe, who is the director of the program in medical ethics at UCSF, Emeritus, and is currently serving as the president of the Greenwall Foundation in New York. Dr. Jeff Silvers is medical director of pharmacy and infection control at Sutter Health. And I am, by the way, Bill Eisenberg, and I'm the chief quality and safety officer at Sutter Health as well. So I would like to welcome you all. And first, because I mentioned some new attendees and new co-hosts of this session, I'd like to turn it over to Tom Hannenberg. Tom, if you'd like to do formal introductions for Carrie, please.
Oh, thank you so much, Bill. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Carrie Pleat, who has been named, a little feedback here, sorry, Regional President for Kaiser Foundation Health Plan and Hospitals for Northern California. And we're really excited to have her with us. You get her on her first day, actually a couple of hours of just stepping into her office, but she comes to us with a wealth of experience. She comes to us from WellStar in Atlanta, Georgia, where she has been for the last 5 years the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for a newly formed hospital division, which she led with the integration of Tenet Healthcare's 5 hospitals in the market and a full community health system following its acquisition and merger with WellStar. So she has a very strong track record of driving excellence through teams and engagement with medical groups, and demonstrated exceptional leadership in creating a single acute care enterprise for WellStar during this time. More importantly, though, as Bill alluded to, some of you already know her and her reputation. Before WellStar, she was 17 years with Sutter Healthcare, and she held a number of progressive roles in operations, strategy, and leadership, serving as Chief Operating Officer, Chief Administrative Officer of multi-hospital entities for Sutter, and then ultimately the CEO of Sutter Medical Center in Sacramento, where during her tenure, they achieved a number of outstanding awards with Truven for their Everest Award, Truven Health Analytics 100 Top Hospitals and Top 50 Cardiovascular Hospitals, and Modern Healthcare's Best Places to Work. But really what set Carrie apart from all the other candidates for Kaiser Permanente Northern California, besides her professional track record, is her long-standing commitment to leadership development in healthcare. She currently serves as a chair-elect for the American College of Healthcare Executives after serving in governance roles in California and on the National Board of Governors. And she's chair-elect of the Healthcare Executive Study Society and serves on the alumni committee of Virginia Commonwealth University Health Administration Program. So wealth of experience, and that's just a few of her civic and professional society engagements. I've kind of truncated it just to the most recent. So everyone here at Kaiser Permanente is thrilled to have her joining our team, and we look forward to having her lead the Northern California region. I'll turn it over to Carrie for some additional comments.
Great, Tom. Thank you very much. And I'm going to apologize to everybody else who had to listen to all of that. It is great because it was so thoughtful, Tom. Thank you. It is great to be back in the Bay Area. I was here for 17 years and then popped over to Atlanta for 5 years, but I am back home. It is great to be back with all of you. And I know I see some very familiar names on the list. I look forward to, once we're past COVID, to see all of you in person and be able to celebrate with all of you being back in. And it is an absolute pleasure to be back with Dr. Eisenberg, who I've known for over a decade, who is just a wonderful clinician, wonderful leader. And I'm great to be with you and back with some Sutter colleagues. And I could not be more thrilled to be helping lead Kaiser in Northern California, especially during these times, these unprecedented times with the international pandemic. And the flu season is going to come and give us a little bit of fun as well. But great to be back with the Bay Area Council. Great to be back with Dr. Eisenberg. And Tom, thanks again for embarrassing me on my first day. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you. It's really wonderful to have you back. And as Carrie mentioned, as the healthcare organizations across Northern California have faced this pandemic, one of the things that we're learning is just how important our collegiality and our working together has been. I cannot tell you the number of times that I've met with the chief medical officers at Kaiser, Dignity, Common Spirit, and it's just been such a productive conversation that we've had, and the ability for us to leverage our considerable interests and talent. I think you'll see that evidenced in today's session. So welcome back, Carrie, and we're really delighted to have you in our mix. We'd like to get started with today's session by posing a poll question to everybody. So there's capability for each of you to respond to this, and the poll question is, would you get a COVID-19 vaccine if it were available to you today? That may be coming as a reality based on news. So you can see the poll is up in front of everybody. There's a yes, a no, or a maybe. So if people would just respond to the poll, that would be great. We'll give you a couple minutes before we show the results. Okay, Justin, you want to display results of that polling question for us? Okay, so we're seeing roughly 53% would say yes, 15% no. We've got some undecided fence walkers here. So we'll see what we if any of the commentary that you're hearing today changes that opinion.
Right.
We hope that you get some information that is meaningful to you and helps you make an informed decision about the value of a COVID-19 vaccine. We'd like to start with Dr. Jeff Silvers. I mentioned Jeff is our medical director of vaccinations and pharmacy here at Sutter Health. And Jeff, you want to kick us off, please?
Okay. Let me turn this to slideshow here and we'll be ready to go. There we go, slideshow, beginning. Okay, hi everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this panel discussion today. We're going to discuss, I'm going to discuss the COVID vaccine, and this is clearly the most anticipated vaccine since polio. And just to give you an idea, we've been talking about a COVID vaccine, remembering 2020 has been quite a long year for all of us. It started beginning this year, and here we are at the end of the year already talking about a vaccine in 1 year. Understanding polio vaccine, they started the work 25 years before it was finally released. So there's multiple different kinds of vaccines that are possible. And here's examples. You can have a weakened live virus, which is kind of like the nasal flu vaccine. You could have a dead virus. You could have an alternative virus that's been genetically modified, which are some of the new vaccines that are being investigated. You could have adjuvanted protein particles, or you could have subunits of the virus genetic sequences, RNA or DNA. And the vaccines we're going to talk about today are subunits of the virus that are RNA. And you could have conjugate vaccines. So what are some of the requirements for approval of a new vaccine? First of all, it must prevent or at least lessen the severity of disease in at least half the number of people who receive it. Understand, Pfizer just announced today their preliminary results that it is over 90% of the people who received it had at least prevention or lessened severity of disease. So that's very exciting. Monitoring must happen for at least 2 months after the last dose, and cases are counted at least 1 week after the last dose. Most of these vaccines, well, all the ones we're going to talk about today are 2 doses. And then, of course, safety and efficacy must be monitored after approval. And Pfizer announced today that they did not have any safety events documented. And trials must involve participants diverse in age and race. The Pfizer vaccine has over 40% diversity in race and ethnicity, over 30% in the United States. It has a wide range of age, going down to 12 years old in children. It's the only vaccine trial right now for the United States that goes that low in age. And of course, higher ages are actively enrolled. And then the emergency use authorization by the FDA will be made on a case-by-case basis. So I took this slide, this graphic off of the New York Times Coronavirus Vaccine Tracker, which was updated on November 3rd. And just to kind of give you an idea how fast things are changing, phase 1 is now 38 vaccines being tested, safety and dosage. Just a week ago, it was 36. All the other numbers are unchanged. The 6 vaccines that have limited approval in the world, 4 of them are from China and 2 are Russian, and none of them have phase 3 trials, which are the large trials that we're having now. So vaccine development in 2020, this is really important. So in the right corner here, you have a kind of a pictorial drawing of a coronavirus, which reflects crown. And these red spikes sticking out of the virus are the famous S protein. That is the part of the virus that attaches to the respiratory cells that enables the virus to enter and cause disease. So you find the protein, the pathogen you need to counter. In this case, it's that S protein, those red spikes. Code the sequence of the gene making the protein. Find the RNA in this virus that is coded for that S protein. Create a vaccine using that code. Give the mRNA or give some part of the virus that makes the mRNA and create a vaccine where you'll then make those antibodies, which you can see there, kind of the gray shaped things at the top. And those are the antibodies that are attached to the spike protein, and that's how you have a vaccine. So there's 2 mRNA vaccines near release, with Pfizer being first most likely. Each require 2 doses. It's important to note they are not interchangeable. If you get 1 dose of the Moderna vaccine, you cannot get 1 dose of the Pfizer. You have to get 2 of the same vaccine. None of them have living virus in them. In this case, they have portions of the mRNA. The Pfizer vaccine, which is the one that made the news again today, has extremely complex storage requirements. So again, what is an mRNA vaccine? And that's what we'll need to hear about. It's modified messenger RNA. The reason it's modified a little bit is for stability reasons. And they're nanoparticle vaccines, which means they're extremely small particles. They're coated with lipids, and lipids are really important because it helps them penetrate the membranes of the human cell in this case, so that this part of the vaccine can get inside the cell to duplicate and make that famous S spike protein and therefore make antibodies. The vaccine is produced completely in vitro, comparison to like the flu vaccine, which is made from chicken eggs. It might not produce effective mucosal immunity. The vaccine is given as an injection. It's going to produce IgG antibodies, which is important to know is immunity of the airways, the nose, the mouth are mostly IgA. And this vaccine will not produce that. So people may conceivably still carry the virus or even be able to transmit the virus, but the IgG is the one that will protect the host. It will require 2 doses. Side effects are likely to be fairly common, including fever and sore arms, not necessarily severe side effects, but severe side effects are not being identified, but localized ones, a little bit of aching, and some fever. It's higher than the flu vaccine, understanding that about 10% of people who get flu vaccine get side effects with 2 to 3% getting fevers. So there's 2 vaccines that are mRNA. Moderna in the phase 3 trial with large participant numbers was started July 27th. They completed enrollment in 30,000 participants last month. Notably, almost about 23% over the age of 65, so that's good because they're the highest risk group for dying. And cases are counted about 2 or more weeks after the second injection, and they need 151 cases of COVID before they can submit to the FDA for EUA approval to show that it works better than the control. And the goal there is of over about 60% or higher efficacy. The Pfizer vaccine, which is the one that again is making the news right now, it started the trial the same day as the Moderna vaccine. It's completed enrollment of 44,000 participants. They may be going a little higher. It's the only one that goes down to age of 12. They count cases 7 days or more after the second injection. Their goal was 70% or higher efficacy, but again, report on the news today, it's over 90%. So there's 2 leading vaccines that we're going to talk about, the Pfizer and the Moderna, and notably is the long-term storage differences. The Pfizer vaccine needs ultra-cold storage at minus 70 degrees centigrade. This is minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Pharmacies, hospitals, health departments don't routinely have that capability. The Moderna vaccine, which is a little further behind, but not much further behind, is minus 20 degrees centigrade or minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit, much more doable. You'll notice the dosing intervals are different. The Pfizer vaccine is 3 weeks and the Moderna will be 4 weeks. Pfizer is expecting to have about 20 to 40 million doses available by the end of the year and 1 billion doses by the end of next year. And Moderna hopes to have 20 million by the end of this year to early part of next year, and then again 500 to 1 billion doses. So Pfizer distribution. So the government has set up a distribution for things like remdesivir, the antiviral that's approved for treatment, and they have a plan where they're using the military to distribute through private delivery companies, but the military kind of oversees it. Pfizer is going to be bypassing that and have their own just-in-time distribution plan directly from their manufacturing facility warehouses. Probably it has something to do with cold chain capabilities. I mean, that vaccine is very critical that it be maintained at minus 70 degrees centigrade. And so you want to minimize the transit stops so that you minimize the risk of that virus, the vaccine being exposed to a temperature higher than what is needed to keep it frozen. The Pfizer vaccine's got the order doses of about 1,000 doses, close to like 975 for each minimum order. So a lot of places have to have huge storage capacity. They have developed their own thermal cooler, and it can keep it in a deep freeze for 10 days using dry ice, which can then be refilled. But it can't be opened for like a minute or no more than 2, I think it is, more than twice a day. It has to be kept cold the whole time. And they have real-time GPS and thermal monitoring. The Moderna distribution will be federal government coordinated, and the Department of Defense will lead the logistics providers, and they will use private delivery companies. But again, the federal government is going to coordinate the distribution, whereas the Pfizer is going to do theirs on their own. So my conclusions are either 1 or 2 vaccines are likely to be approved for emergency use by the end of this year. Efficacy is very likely to meet appropriate guidelines, which is 50% or higher, understanding that Pfizer is now saying they're over 90%. Storage and delivery options are going to make a lot of difference with the ultra-cold storage. Other vaccines, there's many vaccines. I showed you that first slide there of how many different ones are in various stages. Several others are likely to get approval next calendar year, and they won't have the same temperature limitations. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Silvers. We really appreciate your input on this. Before we get into our next speaker, I'd like to remind all of you that each of our 3 panelists today have been specially selected by Governor Newsom to be on the CDPH sponsored panel to draft the guidelines for vaccination and what prioritization schema will be in use for that. That team has only had 1 meeting to date, so they're actively in the process of finalizing their recommendations to the state. And obviously, comments and questions that come up on today's conversation will help inform them as they make their deliberations. A huge piece of those deliberations will include the bioethics of it. And so our next speaker is Dr. Bernie Lowe from UCSF and the Greenwall Foundation. And Dr. Lowe will talk to us about some of those bioethical aspects. If there are any questions that come up during his talk or any that Dr. Silvers has raised already in his talk, please make sure that you put those into the Q&A box, and we'll get to them when we get to that part of the discussion today. Thank you. And Bernie, you want to take it away? I think you're on mute, Dr. Lowe.
Still muted. Hi, can you all see my slides? No, you can't. So let's try and share the screen again. Let's go there.
There we go.
And let's go to slideshow. Okay, so thanks very much, Bill. And I really appreciate the invitation. So just to say a little bit about the Pfizer announcement, their most recent press release is a little different from what Jeff said. They anticipate 50 million doses worldwide by the end of 2020, but 130 billion doses worldwide by the end of 2021. As Jeff said, it's not clear how they're going to allocate it, either to the US or to California. The US is about 4.25% of the world population, and California is about 12% of the US population. So you can imagine, at least at the onset, there will be a severe shortage, which forces us to all consider the question, who should go first for the vaccine among the people who are willing to take it when not all can get it right off the beginning? So there are a lot of people you might think should be first in line. And one group perhaps is elderly people in nursing homes. There have been outbreaks. They've been isolated, cut off from their loved ones who have to communicate via the window. In addition to the people in nursing homes, similar considerations would probably apply to the people who work in nursing homes, and not just nursing homes, but home health aides, comes to people's houses, and other elder assisted living facilities. The workers in these sorts of situations often work at more than one site, and they obviously go back and forth with the community. So they can also spread infection if they get it to others in the community. Another group that many people would talk about going right towards the beginning are nurses and doctors who take care of patients in acute care hospitals and other health facilities. In addition to the doctors and nurses, there are also respiratory techs, nurses aides, first responders actually, and then the other staff that work in a hospital, the people who clean the rooms, the people who transport patients to radiology imaging tests, the techs who run the radiology imaging studies, all of them are integral to providing care. And I just want to note that nationwide, the number of cases continues to go up, and many hospitals in many regions are fast reaching their capacity. School teachers, any of you who have young children know it's been really hard for them. Their development socially and intellectually is just not what it should be, given they're not interacting. And so school teachers might be at the top of a lot of people's lists. Finally, there are a lot of other occupations that provide really essential things to the ongoing smooth functioning of society. So the people who work in particularly meat processing plants, who process the meat that ends up in our grocery stores, there have been outbreaks there. And the grocery store clerks who work to provide important essential consumer goods to those of us in the community. Bus drivers and public transportation are another key essential occupation. So I've tried to group these different suggestions by category. So one group is those at high risk for COVID infection and death. Second are those who are providing direct patient care to COVID patients. And the third are those who are essential for society's opening, reopening, and smooth functioning. So on the right-hand side are the reasons you might want to prioritize that group. You might want to protect those with the vaccine, protect those who are at the greatest risks, because that will prevent the greatest number of new infections and deaths. And one also benefit of that would be it would reduce the health disparities that are so striking in the COVID pandemic. The reason for prioritizing those who provide direct face-to-face care to COVID patients is that they're needed to take care of the increasing number of sick patients that are now needing hospitalization and care. And without them, deaths would almost certainly go up because there just won't be state-of-the-art care. And those who are essential for society opening, we really need to get the economy and society going again. Now, who are essential workers? The Department of Homeland Security has identified a group who are needed for public health and safety and who provide economic and national security. That's a very broad list of occupations, and it's between 40 million to 62 million in the US workforce. Way too many for the beginning of the virus, of the vaccine allocation. So let me say a little bit about a report from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. They put together an expert panel with diverse professional backgrounds representing diverse populations. And they recently issued a framework for how they recommended allocating the vaccine at the beginning. And since then, the ACIP, the committee at CDC that makes nationwide vaccine recommendations, has recommended a very similar framework. So they said, let's have a jump start, what they called phase 1A. And they prioritized high-risk health workers and first responders, the people who provide direct patient care. Then they said, if there's enough to go to some more people, let's prioritize in phase 1B, people who have 2 or more factors for significantly higher risk. So diabetes, obesity, coronary heart disease, chronic renal insufficiency, all those put you at higher risk for more serious illness. And they also recommended seniors who are living in congregate settings where infections can spread rapidly one to another. Then they said, there'll be another phase where there's more vaccine available. Let's call that phase 2. They then prioritized K-12 teachers and the staff in the schools, as well as childcare workers. Also in phase 2 would be critical workers in high-risk settings. And then they said, let's hope there's enough vaccine for those who have factors for moderately higher risk. And included in that priority group are people who live in shelters, whether homeless shelters or other shelters, group homes, such as for young adults, prisons and the staff in prisons. And then they said all older adults over 65 because they are at risk for more adverse outcomes. I'm going to skip over phase 3 and phase 4 because by then there'll be a lot more vaccine to go around and many more in the population will be able to receive it. I'm going to say a little bit about the geographical distribution. So this is a map, of COVID cases by zip code in San Francisco. And as you can see, the highest, the absolute number of cases is the Mission District, which is 94110. By Incidence of cases in the population, 94124 is Bayview Hunters Point. 94107 is South of Market, where the city's largest homeless shelter is. And 94103 is the Tenderloin. So these are the areas where there's a lot of social vulnerability, and they actually have the highest rate of infection. It's also clear that in COVID, race and ethnicity play a large role in predisposing people to get the infection and be hospitalized, and perhaps also for death. So African Americans, Hispanic, Latinx populations are at increased risk, as are Native Americans. Now, interesting, if you look at the right-hand column in deaths, if you look not just at race, ethnicity, but correct for other factors such as predisposing chronic illnesses such as obesity, diabetes, and so forth, if you take into account those factors, it's the greater prevalence of those chronic illnesses that seem to be the most important factor, not race, ethnicity itself. So the National Academy of Medicine recommended in order to mitigate COVID-19 disparities in outcomes that 25% of vaccines in each phase be set aside for vulnerable neighborhoods with a markedly higher rate of infection and death. So not allocating in person level, but allocating in the community level. So let me just leave you with some take-home thoughts. COVID-19 is complicated, and allocating vaccines when there's a shortage is going to be complicated. People will disagree on priorities. We all have different perspectives. And I think part of what will be important is to come to some agreement, at least in California, but perhaps also nationwide, who should have priority in the early stages of vaccine shortage. The process by which those decisions are made is really important if people are going to trust that the allocation process is fair. It needs to be transparent, I think, and it needs to include stakeholders. So let me stop there and thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lowe. That was a very informative segment. We really appreciate it. Our third panelist for this morning is Dr. Randy Bergen from Kaiser Permanente, who's going to give us some additional impacts on the concept of vaccine hesitancy and being sure that we can address that, which is, we know this from the case of flu and other vaccinations, that there are people about hesitancy. So Dr. Bergen is going to talk about that. Before Randy gets started, I would like to say there are some fabulous questions coming in. I'm very excited about what we're going to be discussing in the Q&A period, so keep those questions coming. You're a very insightful crowd, and I think we're going to have a wonderful discussion. But let's first hear from Dr. Bergen before we get into the Q&A section. Randy, do you want to take it away?
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Bill. Welcome, everyone. I can't tell you what an honor and a privilege it is to serve on this panel with Jeff and Bernard, and as well as kind of to serve with them on the state panel. I think we're tasked with some very interesting things, and I'm just exceptionally gratified to be part of it, and also have a huge amount of confidence that we'll be able to do the work. I also, in addition to my role as being kind of the clinical person involved with our vaccines in Northern California, Kaiser, I've also served on our TPMG, the Doctors Board of Directors, as the elected director for 12 years. And I want to welcome Carrie to the team. Want to let you know that Tom and others I work with for years, and it's just an incredible team that you're joining, and we're just so excited that you'll be part of it. So I wanted to extend that welcome. So what about the vaccine safety issue, and specifically the issue of vaccine hesitancy? But before we kind of get to the issue of vaccine hesitancy, I want to discuss a little bit the process by which we're going to get a vaccine actually approved. So if we move on to the next slide, there are three kind of essential ingredients, and there's been certainly a lot of discussion in the press, a lot of kind of political, more slanted comments perhaps made, over the course of the last few months. But I think as a general comment, the three groups, pharma, the FDA, and the CDC, that are really are stewards of this, I think have really stepped up, and all three of these groups have really developed a commitment to making sure that established standards are followed. Yes, it is unprecedented, the speed, but I think as I go into my talk, I think you'll understand that speed is not cutting corners, but in fact still done in a very deliberate and scientific way. Certainly I hope that should leave most of us at the end of this discussion feeling like that the vaccine is ready for prime time when it is ready for prime time. So first of all, there's pharma, there's the companies themselves. They're the ones that are responsible for developing the product, and they have continued to go through the same basic processes that they always go through with vaccine development, basically a phased trial approach. The first phase of the trial is a very, very small trial where they kind of look and determine what the dose should be primarily of the vaccine, and if they're going to do multiple doses, what the duration should be in between doses. Then there's the phase 2 trials that is looking at kind of the initial efficacy and safety. They're very small studies in general. Sometimes you can do a phase 1 and phase 2 trial together. And then once they've kind of developed that foundation, then the companies move on to the phase 3 trials. And the phase 3 trials are really the essential trials. These are trials that you cannot rush. These need thousands and thousands of people. And they look in much greater detail in terms of the safety profile of the vaccine, as well as the efficacy. What was just in the news today, that 90% effectiveness is incredibly encouraging. Might want to digress a little bit. There's kind of two terms that always get me confused. There's efficacy and effectiveness. And efficacy is more kind of what happens in the laboratory, looking at antibody levels and things like that. Effectiveness is really the real world on the ground benefit that the vaccine gives. The number of people that are protected from the vaccine, and as I read the press releases, what Pfizer is reporting is a 94% effectiveness, or a 90+% effectiveness. They only had 94 people that they reported in their initial group that actually developed infection out of about 44,000 participants. So again, I haven't read the entire document that was just in the press release, but if indeed the vaccine is that effective, that's incredibly important to know. And you can only really kind of develop those kind of assertions about a vaccine you have to do it on a large number of people, and you have to study those large number of people for an extended period of time, at least 2 months, and that's what the companies have kind of held to. Once they've developed that information, then they move on to the FDA. And it's the FDA's responsibility in the United States to license vaccines. The FDA has an advisory committee that's made up of renowned physicians across the country, people you may have heard of, like Paul Offit, who's a huge vaccine advocate, and certainly one of the smartest PEDS people I've ever heard speak, is part of that committee. And it really is their charge to look over the science of this vaccine, to determine, and in any vaccine, to determine whether it is safe and effective enough to be offered to the citizens of the United States. And then the final piece is the Centers for Disease Control. They also have an advisory committee on immunization practices, or ACIP, and their job is to kind of riff off of what the FDA does, and develop the specific immunization guidelines that are disseminated then through the MMWR, which is the mortality report that's sent out on a regular basis, that is what we clinicians use as kind of our Bible to decide how we're going to administer the vaccine. And I think that, you know, while there have been kind of maybe some concerns that have been kind of voiced over the process of the last few months, again, I think that these three groups have really stepped up and done their due diligence, and I really have confidence that they will continue to do their due diligence as we move forward. If we move on to the next slide, a couple of kind of specific comments. Again, I kind of note that at this point, we're still in kind of the initial review of the phase 3 trials. Some of this kind of came out a little bit earlier than we were expecting. I think most of us were thinking it would be kind of late November into December, because as I alluded to, the phase 3 trials really have to kind of evaluate people over like a 2-month period of time at a minimum. But the Pfizer study in particular did start a little bit earlier and is starting to already kind of show us some of those results. I expect to have continued results from the Pfizer and Moderna product over the next few weeks to months. There's another active vaccine trial going on, the AstraZeneca vaccine, that is about within that same time frame. Another important vaccine that will be starting its phase 3 trial soon will be the Johnson & Johnson product, I'm sorry, the Johnson & Johnson product as well as the AstraZeneca product is in its phase 3 trials, and we hope to have more data later on. And then there's a 5th product that will be starting in December, which is another vaccine, a slightly different kind of technique that we hope to have some data on by early in the year. So there really are kind of 5 vaccines that are kind of in the mix to be kind of developed and maybe disseminated over the course of maybe the next 6 months. So I think it's very exciting. What about this issue of emergency use authorization? There's been a lot of talk about that versus standard licensure. It's been used a great deal over the course of the pandemic to release treatment like remdesivir, as well as some of the testing, but it's not a process that's very commonly used in vaccines. And I think that's led some to believe that, well, maybe again, will there be shortcuts or things like that? And again, I really want to reassure people that as I kind of look over the emergency use authorization process, they're really going to be using the same rigor as they would use for standard licensure, but it does provide them with a few kind of more kind of documentation and kind of just regulatory relief that will make the process faster. But in terms of the science of actually determining whether these vaccines are safe and effective, it's not going to slow that down at all. And in fact, in some ways, with the emergency use authorization, it actually will encourage and promote the development of some of these other vaccines. Sometimes when a vaccine is licensed under standard licensure, it actually creates a situation where there's a little bit of a disincentive for other vaccines to kind of enter the market. So as I look at the information right now, I do anticipate that the vaccines will be licensed under emergency use authorization, and I would not consider that to be a situation where, gee, they're cutting some important corners here. They're making it available before it's not ready. I think contrary to that, if they do the EUA, it will be ready. It will be scientifically valid to use it on a regular basis. Also, the third part to this is I think some of this third part was kind of when there was more kind of politicization and there were some concerns about what the process would be, but the state of California and other states have developed kind of their own committees. And again, I think that just provides very useful kind of secondary oversight. In the state of California, we have a scientific safety group that is now kind of working in conjunction with other states, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. They'll look at this safety data, they'll look at this efficacy data to decide for people in the Western United States whether these vaccines should be used. And then it's kind of our charge as a part of the guideline committee to kind of help the state of California to decide, as Bernard very eloquently went through, who we should be most focused on. And want to emphasize then that work group will be ongoing, and while it's not really quite a part of my presentation, a critical part of how we deliver the vaccine. So if we move on to the next slide, I guess the big question, the question for me, will I get the COVID vaccine if it's passed all these steps? And if we move on to the next slide, yes. And I'll recommend it to my colleagues, my patients, and my family. So I want to say that's what I'm coming from. And for the 53% of you that said yes to that, thumbs up. And for the others that were kind of uncertain, hopefully by the end of the presentation, you can be part of that 53% as well. So how do we move the you 47% into another place? And if you are part of that 53%, how do you help us to move that 47% into the yes category? Because it is a difficult decision. And want to emphasize, as a pediatrician, I've been working with this my entire career. Some of parents who are deeply loving and deeply caring and deeply devoted to their children are sometimes some of the hardest to convince that vaccines in general are the right thing to do. So this is kind of a little bit of a modification of some of the conversations that myself and my colleagues at Kaiser Permanente have kind of developed over the years to talk with people about vaccines, but also other kind of difficult conversations. So want to emphasize that kind of empathy is the key. People may be upset or they may be angry if you make kind of specific recommendations, and it's your job to really kind of diffuse the situation by showing empathy, because that's the only way you're really going to make the connection. I think gone are the days where the doctor was up on the pedestal and could point their finger and say, well, this is what you should do, and that's the way it happened. That's no longer kind of the way medicine works, and nor should it. So empathy is the key. Understanding the other person's feelings, communicating that you understand the person's feelings back to them. I mean, it's so critical to not just listen, but to reflect back to them what you're hearing, because empathy is so powerful. That kind of creates a whole different level of connection. That connection that even if you can't leave the room with the same conclusion, that you're on the same side. So empathy is the key to start with. And if we move on to the next slide, just again, get curious, not furious. I'm right. This is a good vaccine. You should get that vaccine. But if I'm very hard-headed about that approach, I'm not going to be very successful. So again, getting curious and not furious, asking yourself, putting yourself in that person's position. So while you have these discussions, again, trying to kind of put yourself in the other person's position and understand their feelings, listen and reframe the discussion. Making sure that your responses are clear and definitive. That again, even if the answer is a no, you're not getting into some kind of debate, but you're leaving kind of communication lines open. And then finally, kind of emphasizing that the value of this relationship is really important to you, even if there is a disagreement, and further conversations can certainly happen in the future. And I might add, as I've learned this technique, I've found that it actually is relatively helpful also in talking to spouses and to children. So you may want to take particular note of this, because I found it to be very helpful in other situations as well. So I think that's the end of my presentation, and turn it back over to Bill and see how we can do with answering your questions.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Randy. So I mentioned that we have a lot of really wonderful questions that have come in, and without any further ado, why don't we get going, and I'll call on each of our panelists to maybe answer some of these questions. April, I'm going to start with a couple of questions that you began. I hope it was clear from Randy's talk just now that the process itself that has been going on with the multiple steps of review is not particularly different. You did ask a question, were there any specific changes within the FDA to promote getting this done any quicker. So Randy, were there any procedural steps that the FDA did that you're aware of?
No, not at this point. I think, I probably should have commented during my presentation, because I think it really is critical that there really are kind of three reasons why this happened so quickly. One is we actually did have some experience with coronaviruses. There were two other pandemics of coronaviruses, MERS and SARS, and there were vaccine development as a result of that. So that many places, although it wasn't all the way into commercial development, there were many institutions around the world that were working on coronavirus vaccines. So number one, we did have a little bit of a head start because of that. Number two, some of the new vaccine technologies that Jeffrey was talking about are faster. The messenger RNA process is especially fast. It was only 63 days from the time that they actually sequenced the genome of the COVID-19 virus to the development of the very kind of first vaccine that Moderna would start to use in their phase 3 trials. So the technology that we've developed over the years has been able to accelerate the process. And then the final thing is that the drug companies and all the money that was put into it by governments and things like that has created a situation where we're really doing things more in series rather than sequence. It's standard to not even think about production in mass quantities until you're very far along in your phase 3 trials, and sometimes not even until the vaccine is approved. In this particular situation, everything was going, kind of in series. So at the very beginning of the point that there was vaccines from Moderna, from Pfizer, from the other companies that were looking at least, relatively promising, they were making arrangements with the companies and with each other to produce this in mass quantities. So those three things have what's really accelerated the process, not really that we're cutting corners.
Great, thank you, Randy. Jeff, I'm going to turn to you next, and I've got a couple questions. They're not necessarily related, but I think I'll just put them together. First one comes from Richard Liu, and you mentioned about the fact that these vaccines do not help in generating mucosal immunity. And so Richard asked the really insightful question, well, if that's the case, couldn't somebody actually continue to transmit the disease if they have that virus there and it hasn't been altered due to the immune response? And then the second question has to do with eligibility for the vaccine. Olga asked the question, if I have a past history or somebody has a past history of group B strep, can they participate in trials?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the questions. And in terms of group B strep, I think it's Guillain-Barré syndrome, actually.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm an obstetrician, and group B strep is what GBS always means.
Right. So I believe that I have not seen anywhere that would be a contraindication, and I have not seen data showing that it has developed yet, and definitely not with the mRNA vaccines, but it is something that's being monitored. And again, the incidence if you talk about the flu vaccine, the incidence of the Guillain-Barré syndrome is 1 in a million, other than those rare particular seasonal vaccine strains that we've had where it's been a problem, but that's actually unusual. And so it's about 1 in a million, and the background rate of developing Guillain-Barré syndrome is 1 in a million. So it's actually, there's been a lot of concerns about Guillain-Barré syndrome with the flu vaccine, but except for, I think it was in the 70s, it really is not an issue. And as for this one, there's no data yet, but that's obviously something to be monitored. The second thing is about the mucosal immunity, the IgA immunity, and that is a great question, and that's kind of why I raised that. But the goal is to prevent people from getting very ill. If you had immunity, partial immunity, and you ended up getting symptoms consistent with a common cold from a coronavirus, because coronavirus typically causes common colds, I would consider that not a big deal. But that's why, but then when you talk about protecting the vulnerable from severe disease. Well, that's exactly what Dr. Lowe was talking about in terms of the over 65, the people with underlying health issues, and of course, caregivers who are taking, putting themselves at risk of being exposed. And we got to get that population vaccinated. So if the vaccine works on over 90% effectiveness, we will succeed at that.
Jeff, thank you very much. I'm going to hit you with one more question before you get off the mic. Jessica Berg asked the question, how much protection, and I'm going to add in, if any, would an individual have after receiving the first dose, but not the second?
So it's, I don't know with certainty, but the answer is that this mRNA vaccine is a different technology, and you're only being exposed to a small part of the virus. So you don't have background immune responses in your armamentarium that have seen this before. So you really do need 2 doses. Some of the other vaccines technologies that Randy mentioned, you might be able to get a much better response after a single dose, but even some of those will still be recommended 2 doses. This one, I'm not going to make up numbers, but you could anticipate that be much higher with the second dose, and that's why it's so strongly recommended you get a second dose.
Thank you. Bernie, I'm going to turn to you with this one, but you please feel free to call a friend if you want to get some advice on some aspects of this. Seema Shah asked the question if the National Academy of Medicine is making recommendations for storage of some of these high maintenance vaccines that require really expensive criteria, these storage units. How is that working in communities with existing health disparities? How are we making sure that these costly storage apparatuses are being distributed in places like Hunters Point and areas where people are at higher risk and more vulnerable?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The National Academy's report was pretty high level and didn't get into that level of detail, but that's certainly something that needs to be sorted out. I think the question is a really good example of how policies that appear to be fair when you just look at them the first time, when you really dig down, some groups will have a harder time getting access to, in this case, the vaccine because of the cold storage. But I'll defer to either Randy or Jeff on more on the practical aspects of how you get the vaccine if it needs, well, the Pfizer looks like it'll be first, needs the cold storage to locations that may not have the capability of doing that right now.
Yeah, so this is Jeff. So Pfizer did co-develop a thermal storage unit that with dry ice can maintain the vaccine for about 10 days, and that unit can be refilled with dry ice to maintain it. And Pfizer's also developing a kind of more direct method of sending vaccine to locations where they're going to use it right away. And inside those cold units, so they have 1,000 doses in one of those units, and they're kind of in what they call pizza boxes, because the storage packages that go inside there are shaped like pizza boxes, and they each hold about 200 doses. So there are ways to sort it out and maintain it. And again, Pfizer's looked hard at that as because obviously your question is a very valid question. So I think it's doable. It's going to be more complicated, but it is being addressed.
Thank you.
And this is Randy. If I might just add, I certainly second what's already been said. I think that the fact that dry ice is a relatively low-tech solution to this, I also have confidence that it will be technologically more challenging, but in the United States we'll be able to master it. But certainly it's a much more critical issue for the rest of the world. And that's why I'm not sure that the Pfizer vaccine is necessarily going to be the answers to the world's coronavirus pandemic. And I'm very happy that there's a lot of other vaccine manufacturers that won't have those storage requirements. But given that Pfizer will likely be first in the United States, I think we'll be able to figure out in the United States.
I'm going to go next. Actually, Randy, you're going to stay on the mic. I've got a follow-up question for you from April Maddie. It has to do with teachers and children. And if children are not on the list to get it, but the teachers are, and it's only 90% effective, are we still putting the teachers at risk because the kids can just bring it and like kids bring everything?
I'm not sure I like the implications of that. What are you saying about children then? Yeah, I mean, certainly it's true. The fact that many of these safety studies, nothing has really been done in children under 12. It's going to be a while before we can protect children. So therefore, those that are exposed to children are not going to have the degree of protection through the herd that other people that maybe aren't exposed to other children are going to have access to. But still, it's like any other vaccine. If you have the natural protection, you're going to be in a much better position if you are exposed. So yes, pediatricians and teachers will continue to be a group that will be more likely exposed as we go forward until we have a vaccine that we feel is safe and effective for children as well. But still, you're going to be so much better off by getting vaccinated. And as we increase the vaccine coverage over the course of the entire population, so that really only children might still be susceptible, that's going to make a significant dent in the R naught or the infectiousness of the virus that could well bring it close to under 1, even without vaccinating children. So still, teachers should get it when we decide it's available for them.
Great, thanks. A question for you, and it comes from, we're getting some background here.
Bill, could I add something to Randy's answer, which I totally agree with? There are plans to initiate clinical trials or trials in children of effectiveness, but also important safety. So, and the other group that we really don't know whether the vaccine is safe and effective yet is pregnant women. So the manufacturers have already started to think about, once there's initial data like Pfizer seems to have, moving on to the groups that weren't in the first trials, now that we have some evidence that the vaccine is safe and effective.
Thank you. So I have a question, Jeff, I'm going to turn this one to you. This is from Elaine McCann, and she has a really important question. We hear a lot in the news about the value of convalescent serum from those people who have actually had COVID, survived from it, and generate their own immune response to it, their own natural immunity from being exposed. What's their status and eligibility for the vaccination?
So at this point in time, they are still eligible for the vaccine. The vaccine we're not going to require antibody testing to see if you've developed immunity. The antibody testing by itself has its own limitations. And we also know that people who are younger or people that have milder disease have a lower immune response, and the vaccine gets you a higher immune response than natural disease does, except in perhaps those who have life-threatening illness. So at this point in time, even if you've had COVID, the recommendation is that you consider getting vaccinated, and you are likely to have a better immune response than you did to natural disease.
Thank you. I have another question from Richard Liu. This is a good one about the follow-up, because you mentioned phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, Randy, and in the way that we go through the process of this. Once this vaccine is released widely and given to large numbers of people, that's essentially a phase 4 part of a trial, right? But it's not really being done under the auspices of a true research trial. So talk to us about how you see this is going to be monitored once it has wide release.
Sure. Yeah, I think that the people that are involved in this are already thinking about it. I know in particular colleagues I have that are part of the Kaiser Permanente Vaccine Study Center, are intimately involved in the Vaccine Study Data Link, which is a VSD is what it's called, and it's a group of vaccine researchers across the country and academia and other settings that basically monitor vaccinations post-licensure. You're right, there is kind of a typical format which is called phase 4 trials where vaccine companies kind of do some of that evaluation as well. I'm not quite sure whether phase 4 trials, how those will work. But we do have the vaccine data link, safety data link, that will be very, very comprehensive in looking at probably millions of vaccinees across the country for side effects within our Kaiser system. You know, anybody, for instance, that gets a vaccine, we will be linking with their medical records and having certain triggers. So as Jeff mentioned, if someone develops Guillain-Barré syndrome, there'd be kind of an immediate trigger for that individual's medical records to be evaluated. So millions and millions of Americans are going to be part of that process. And then the other part, it's a little bit less scientific, but then there's VAERS, which is the vaccine adverse reaction. And that's a situation where anybody, it doesn't have to be a physician, it can be, you know, the individual, can actually make a report to the CDC if they feel they've had an adverse event. And those are tabulated. If there seems to be a particular signature for a certain vaccine or a certain locale, then the CDC is deployed to investigate that. So there's a lot of rigor post-licensure that will continue to be followed that I have a lot of confidence in.
Thank you so much. Bernie, I'm going to do next with the question that Erica Kelly posed. And her question is, when do we expect to let the public know about the prioritization for who gets vaccines first? Obviously, this has been this question has been put on steroids now with the this announcement from Roche that the drug may be released soon. So any talk on when you all on your panel will have reached some recommendations?
I actually saw the question, started to look through my emails and couldn't find a date. Randy or Jeff, do you have a target date for our committee's work?
Oh, I mean, I think the plan is we're going to start to meet weekly and until we kind of get the job done and the vaccine, when the vaccine's available, will obviously accelerate our need to have meetings. But so we might be seeing a lot of each other in the next few weeks. I don't know, Jeff, do you?
Yeah, actually, I reached out to the chair of our committee today at the state and asked that very question about now with this news, should we start to meet more regularly to make sure that we get our job done in a timely fashion? And the answer is we're meeting this week, and we are that's going to be our first topic is do we need to escalate the frequency of our meetings so that we make sure we get it done? And that's the best that we can do. Our goal is to have those decisions made by the time the vaccine is actually available.
Thank you. So I have a question from Hans Korve. Will the Pfizer vaccine, or actually any one of these vaccines, whether it's Pfizer or Moderna, any one that's in development, require future revaccination? Do we anticipate this is going to be like the flu?
So, Bill, you want me to answer that? Is that okay?
Whichever one. I think each one has capability there.
Okay, fine. So, yes, there's a reasonable chance that this will require an annual vaccine, as we are looking at, even though it's small numbers that we've seen so far of reinfection, people who've had COVID and get it a second time, but we're basing it on clinical symptoms for the diagnosis. We're not basing it on serially following people whether they get it, and we're also looking at how often the virus mutates, and so I think it's not unreasonable to anticipate it will be a yearly vaccine. And if it is, then maybe someday it can be incorporated into the flu vaccine shot at the same time, so you only get one dose once a year. But more to come on that. That's not a definitive of anything.
Jeff, a follow-up question, not on this topic, but a different one. You showed the various numbers of vaccines that each one of these vendors, the big pharma companies, were working on and prognosticated they could release. Alex Evans asked the question, are those the number of total doses, or should it be divided by 2, meaning the number of people that can be vaccinated?
Those are the total doses, and yes, you should divide it by 2. And the actual numbers, as you heard from Bernie, as you heard from me, it varies a little bit. Pfizer is saying 50, 60 million doses by the end of the year for the world, and the question is what percentage of those will go to the United States. My understanding is 20 to 40 million, but we will see. Clearly, there's a lot of push to get out as much as we can once it's approved. And yes, you will divide those numbers by 2.
Thank you. Do any of you, either Jeff or Randy or Bernie, have any information? This is a question from Andras about the Russian or the Chinese vaccines. Any word on that?
Yeah, so those vaccines were only phase 1-2 trials. None of them were phase 3. So they have very small numbers of people, and so they don't really have effectiveness or safety data. They only have data on whether or not they developed an immune response, and small numbers tolerated them. That's all I've been able to find so far.
Great.
Yeah, and this is Randy. I mean, they're using the same basic vaccine technologies. So I would kind of expect, based on the science, that they should, end up with vaccines that are effective. But they clearly, especially in the case of the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik vaccine, they have made shortcuts. Now there's a variety of products in China, and some of them are actually moving and being involved in phase 3 trials. That I think actually have a lot of promise. I mean, they're using kind of older vaccine technologies. One is a live attenuated vaccine, which is a vaccine that actually is a form of the virus, but it's been weakened. They also have a whole killed vaccine, so kind of similar to like the injectable polio vaccine. And those, I think, show real promise, and moving forward, probably more for the rest of the world, but we're not the only game in town in Western Europe and the United States, and I think we have to respect the capabilities definitely of the vaccines that are happening in China. The ones that are happening in Russia, I'm a little bit more skeptical of. So I wouldn't be flying off to Moscow to get my Sputnik vaccine anytime soon.
Yeah.
Thank you. So April Maddie asked a question. If we're also confident in the safety of this vaccine, why is it that doctors are not the first ones being considered for this? What's the story there? And let me start. I haven't really answered much, but then we'll turn it over to Bernie to go from there. First of all, April, not all doctors are created equally from a specialty perspective. There are many physicians who may not be directly exposed in their daily course of rendering care to the kinds of risks that other physicians are. I mentioned earlier on when I screwed up the whole piece about GBS that I'm an obstetrician, and so you can imagine that a woman in labor trying to deliver a child may find that the wearing of a mask is quite problematic as she's trying to get a lot of deep breaths in and out, and doing much heavy breathing while she delivers her child. And so doctors and nurses who are involved very close to that kind of a patient are at significantly higher risk than, let's say, a physician who works in a different specialty and can be at the foot of the bed or maybe even doing a telepsychiatric visit. So it's not as though all physicians are the same in their exposure risks. Bernie, there are other aspects of this, and would you like to go from there?
Well, no, I thought that was a great answer. I just want to say it's not just physicians, it's all the other people at the bedside of patients who have COVID or maybe at risk for COVID. So it's the nurses, the respiratory techs, and so forth. But it depends on the level of risk in your daily work.
Yeah, it's a really important aspect that we physicians realize that our colleague nursing staff are actually exposed with a lot more regularity and for much longer times than we physicians often are. And so really we want to be sure that we protect our nursing staff in the process of rendering the care that they give to our patients in such an exceptional way. Emily Webb asked the question about the complicated storage and cooling aspects of this Roche vaccine. And I'm wondering if any one of the three of you would like to get into some of these details so that we as the public can feel confident that there are effective mitigation strategies to be sure that the appropriate hubs for distribution have been created. Temperature maintenance is safe, because obviously we don't want to end up getting vaccine that then gets lost because of other reasons. Jeff or Randy, do you want to take that one?
Sure.
Well,
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'll let you. No.
Okay.
I think I addressed a fair amount already, but let's go for it.
Yeah. I think that the dry ice is a relatively low technology solution, will be very helpful. Actually, a surprising number of hospitals have -70 freezers. And many of them are developing those capabilities too. So I think as a hub kind of situation, where the larger facilities can kind of be the place that stores the initial supplies, I'm very confident that we'll be able to store them appropriately. This is something that's going to be so rigorously kind of adjudicated by the regulatory groups. I mean, the state is going to be following this very closely. If they ship out, 1,000 vaccines to Kaiser Permanente, we're going to be accountable for using those 1,000, and the same thing for Sutter and all the other venues. So there's going to be a high degree of rigor, I think, in those hubs. And then being able to disperse it to smaller places through the dry ice mechanism. There also is a period of time at which it can be stored in a refrigerated situation. So I think that will also give us a certain amount of flexibility. There was one slide the state presented saying that it was 24 hours in the refrigerator, another one saying 5 days. So I'm not quite sure which one is right. I'm hoping it's 5 days. Certainly if we have that degree of flexibility in a refrigerated situation, that's going to make it even easier. So it's going to be a challenge, but it's not an insurmountable challenge.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if I could just say something, Bill, about that.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yep, of
so
course.
It is 5 days now. So that's been changed at refrigerator. So that's very helpful. And the San Francisco Chronicle just had an article in the last, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, talking specifically about how Sutter has ultra cold storage locations. And I'm sure Kaiser's doing similar types of things, as Randy was saying. So we are planning already to have capabilities, even without the Pfizer thermal storage device, to have ultra cold storage. And if you maintain it in these expensive units that keep it at that temperature, you can keep it for many months. So again, the patients, like the teachers, for example, aren't going to, they're going to be able to go to their doctor to get the vaccine at a special clinics, for example. So all that is being addressed. It's not perfect yet, and we're going to have our bumps, but it's being looked at, and I think we'll be able to manage it.
Great. Thank you very much. One final question about teachers, Jeff, or actually any one of you can answer this. How would you rate their risk compared with other frontline workers, and where do you put them as far as reopening up schools and the vaccination of teachers?
So that's obviously a difficult question, and that is something that our task force is going to be addressing at the state level, because that's why we have a task force of people like Dr. Lowe for ethics, and then we have Dr. Bergen, myself, and another 10 people plus the state. These are the kind of questions we need to answer, and we're going to need to have consensus among experts to weigh the different things and then come up with a decision.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is put up our poll question, if I may please again. And we'd like to just ask all of you, having heard from our three experts, would you get a COVID-19 vaccine available? if it were available to you today. So doctors, I know how competitive each of you are. I'm sure you're asking, did we really sway from the 53? Let's display it for us, Justin. What are the results of the poll? Wow,
Winner.
you guys, you're very persuasive. That's great. That's great. Well, I really hope that the presentation that my three colleagues have shared with you this morning has been helpful in your understanding of what has been going on with the preparations for these several vaccines to protect all of us against COVID-19. We hope that you found this informative. Please know that the Bay Area Council Healthcare Committee is devoted to helping each of us understand issues regarding healthcare, whether they have to do with vaccinations for COVID, the equity of care as it's delivered across our Bay Area. Everything that's important to each of us as members of society is important to the Healthcare Committee. So thank you all for your attendance. We really appreciate your participation in this and in the Bay Area Council. Have a great rest of your day.